Hey everybody, we are moving on to topic 7.14, post-war diplomacy. You can see that over here on the right side. Yesterday, we examined the military aspect of World War II, looking at key strategies, key contributors to the war effort, how we won the war, looking at things like D-Day and island hopping. Those are some good key terms to remember. Hopefully you guys were able to get your reading done, look at some of the videos, and have a firm understanding of what it actually took to win the war over in Europe and in East Asia. So we're going to move on from that and look at what happens when the war ends. This is probably the most important topic as we move into period number 8, because the role of America in the world is going to change drastically at the end of World War II. And when we look at period 8, we're going to be examining things like Vietnam, the Cold War, intervention in Korea, all sorts of actions that the U.S. takes that lead to some good things, some bad things, but ultimately really shape the time period from about 1945 to 1980 or so. And so understanding what post-war diplomacy looks like for the U.S. and for the world is going to be critical as we move into period 8. So let's take a quick look at the learning objective here. We see that we need to be able to explain the consequences of U.S. involvement in World War II. The historical developments that we're going to use to understand this are noted here. The war-ravaged condition of Asia and Europe and the dominant U.S. role in the Allied victory and post-war peace settlements allowed the U.S. to emerge from the war as the most powerful nation on Earth. Okay, so that is a key difference between who we were as, well, it's not letting me draw there, between who we were before the war and who we were after. So the first thing that we need to address is, what was the toll of the war? When I say toll, I mean destruction to landscape, destruction to infrastructure, the human death toll. The war left like we see here, ravaged condition of Asia and Europe. So I want to take a quick look at that so you guys understand that. Probably the most important thing to note here is that the war took place in Europe and in Asia, not in the United States. Outside of Pearl Harbor, there's no conflict in the U.S. From foreign powers. And so this alone is what helps propel the U.S. to be a world power. The infrastructure is untouched. We have created tons of jobs. The economy is very, very strong. We've gotten out of the Great Depression, and we are among the world powers. We're the only one who isn't facing a physically destroyed nation. And so that's very important to remember as we move forward. In terms of loss across the world, the World War II is the most devastating event, arguably the most devastating event in all of human history, but certainly in modern history. There's a fantastic video that I'll link on the classroom page. I'll have the link up there. It's called The Fallen. It includes all sorts of graphics that show just the cost of war. This is a screenshot. I know you guys can't see the whole thing, but this shows various conflicts throughout history. This is World War I right here. This is World War II. 70 million people, civilians and military, killed in that war. We consider it, under a 10-year conflict. 70 million people is a huge number. Again, you guys can go take a look at that. I'm just scanning through it here real quick. It's a very, very good video that shows the numbers of people killed and military killed, and just the overall destruction of the war. It includes information on the Holocaust. See that right there. which 6 million, approximately 6 million people alone were killed in that event over the course of the war. So I would highly encourage you guys to take a look at it. It's an award-winning um, graphic video, and it shows the devastation of the war. It's unlike anything we've ever seen, especially with current events going on with the virus and everything. There's a lot of talk about global destruction, and to put that in perspective, go back and look at the destruction that occurred following World War II. We've never seen anything like it, and hopefully we don't see anything like it in our lifetime. So, okay, if you go to your textbook, there's a section titled "The Toll of War." This is in, I believe, chapter 24. This includes numbers, just like I talked about. One stat to note, that number, they use 50 million, even though total losses are closer to 70. That is 2.5%, closer to 3% of the world's entire population. 3% of the world's entire population. Poland alone lost about 15% of its entire population. Those numbers are huge. So the war is very clearly quite devastating. Okay, so that's the toll of war. As we move on to the diplomatic side of things, how does, as the war ends, what type of peace treaties are signed? How is the world set up for the future? There's some really critical or important things that happen here. So one thing we have to think back to is the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed at the end of World War I. And if you recall, that didn't turn out too well as it punished Germany too harshly, didn't set up a strong collective security system with the League of Nations, which the U.S. did not join. So when World War II came to an end, that was fresh in the minds of world leaders. And so the big three, which would be the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, have several meetings leading up to the end of the war. By the time we get to 1945, the atomic bomb is dropped in August. Atomic bombs are dropped in August, and the war in Europe is coming to an end. And there's a clear need to organize peace talks and negotiations as we get to the end of the war. And so at Potsdam, Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill meet. Roosevelt passes away. And I'm sorry, I need to flip those around. At Yalta, Roosevelt was president. Potsdam, he was not. Harry Truman was there. But either way, Roosevelt passes away in between those meetings. Harry Truman takes over as president of the United States, which, as you read in your book, you'll see that did have an impact on these talks, as the personality of, I'm going to go down to chapter 25 here. Chapter 25, section A. We've got containment and a divided global order. Truman's personality was much different than Roosevelt's, and so you'll scroll down here to Potsdam. There's discussion about Harry Truman replaced Roosevelt, and his approach was slightly different. So make sure you take a look at that. It's important to your understanding of that topic. So throughout the peace discussions, there was talk about what to do with a devastated Europe, and the big three decided to work together to administer Europe. I'm going to go back to your book here and scroll down and take a look at this map. So this is talking about the Cold War, but you can see that almost the whole continent, outside of a few neutral places, was part of one alliance or one group or another. And so the Soviet Union takes the eastern part of the continent. The U.S. and Great Britain take the western part of the continent. And it sets up this rivalry between two ideologies that we'll have to talk about once we get into period 8. But that's one step that's taken. We also see the formation of the United Nations, which is still around today. The UN is a peacekeeping group that is formed. It is led by the U.S. It's situated in the U.S. It's in New York. And this is really important because if you remember back to World War I, the U.S. did not partake in collective security with the League of Nations. And so this is quite a change here, and one that you'll want to remember and hold on to. Okay, the last thing we're going to explore is how does the role of America in the world change following World War II? I already mentioned that economically, the U.S. is in a really good spot because of production, because of the fact that the war wasn't fought here, because we have invested in factories and workers, and there's a whole lot of reasons for our economic success, but we are doing well in that area. We're also the most powerful nation in the world militarily. We just dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end the war there. We were part of the winning side in the war in Europe. We are allied with other powerful nations. We are the strongest country in the world. And it's important to note that we are the ones who have the atomic bomb, which is going to be a key factor moving forward. And so our role has gone from being a helpful ally to being the prominent nation on the globe. And so one way that we can see that, and I mentioned this before, but the U.S. is key in the formation of the UN. Again, the UN is located in the United States. The United States takes a prominent role in that organization, and it really demonstrates that we are a protector to the world. And as we move into period 8, we're going to see the U.S. step in to conflicts across the globe, and that's largely because of the power that we hold and the influence that we hold. So for more information on the UN, you guys should take a look at Khan Academy. There's a ton of information on that. You'll see how it's set up, how we're not in the Cold War yet, but you'll see how it is impacted by that. Some of you Model UN people already know all this stuff: General Assembly, the Security Council, the Secretariat, all sorts of good stuff there. But you guys should go back and read this section. There's a comparison between the UN and the League of Nations, the role of the U.S. So this is a really good look at that topic. I would encourage you to go look at that. The last thing I want to mention is a sample question. Let's see if we can zoom in here a little bit. This is a question for you to consider as you read through and finish up period number 7. This is a short answer question. This is from a recent AP exam. So it is a comparison question. Okay, so we see historical difference, historical similarity. That means we're going to be looking at comparison. And so this is asking you to compare the U.S. reaction to international events following World War I and following World War II. So we're looking at how the U.S. was different between those two wars, or at the end of those two wars, and how the U.S. was similar in its reaction to World War I and World War II. Okay, and then section C, briefly explain one specific historical reason for a difference between the U.S. reaction to international events following the wars. In other words, why did the U.S. respond differently? Okay, why did the U.S. respond differently at the end of those two wars? So you may need to go back and review World War I a little bit, but there is some good stuff to look at there. I would encourage you to answer that question on your own. If you want to answer it and send me your response, I can give you feedback on it. I tell you if you're in the right spot or not. But that is the content for topic 7.14, post-war diplomacy. Take a look at Khan Academy. Take a look at this video and read your textbook. I will see you in period 8.